I just feel like if it was my mom or anybody in my family that was missing, I'd want somebody to, to come out and search and try to help find her and bring her home.
We're out here just to support and just be here as more support and see if we can find anything and help out as much as we can.
And I just feel like it's time that we get out there and look for her. I haven't seen any search parties. Who was kidnapped and goes missing at 84 years old. So my concern is her safety and bringing her home.
Right. Volunteers joining the search for Nancy Guthrie. As reports state, the kidnapping probe may see resources scale back as leads have been coming up empty.
Her husband died in Mexico in 1988. 38 years later, a masked man crossed her threshold in the middle of the night, took her, vanished, and 3 days ago, the most powerful cartel in Mexico, operating 60 miles from her front door, erupted into the most violent succession war the country has seen in a decade. Nobody on television is connecting those three sentences. We're going to. A man approaches Nancy Guthrie's door. Calm, deliberate. He's been here before. Surveillance footage confirms it. He knows the camera is there. He covers it with branches. Tap, tap. He doesn't run. He doesn't panic. He moves like someone who was sent, not someone who decided. Right now, investigators are running his DNA through genealogy databases, following a family tree that, according to experts on this case, may trace back across the border. The FBI has already called Mexico. How does a man with zero criminal record in the United States disappear into thin air after taking an 84-year-old woman from her home? Why does his DNA not exist in any American database? And what did Charles Guthrie see in Mexico 38 years ago that may have followed his family home? In this video, we're breaking down the masked man's physical forensic profile, the genealogy trail investigators are now chasing, and the extraordinary, unsettling timeline between Charles Guthrie's death in Mexico and his wife's abduction today. But here's what the news won't say. The suspect's DNA may not be in any American database, because he may not be American. Keep watching. I'll be straight with you. The news is giving you 90-second clips. I'm giving you the full picture. If you want to actually understand what happened to Nancy Guthrie, subscribe to Twisted Crime Ledger. Hit the bell. I post every single day this case is active. Don't miss a thing. Now, let's orient everyone who's just joining this case, because there is a lot here. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, Tucson, Arizona, Catalina Foothills. An upscale neighborhood in the foothills north of the city. She's lived there for decades. She raised her family there. She's the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of NBC's Today Show. On the evening of January 31st, Nancy had dinner at her daughter Annie's house. Her son-in-law, Federico Cioni, Annie's husband, drove her home. She was dropped off just before 10 p.m. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. The next morning, on February 1st, she didn't show up for her weekly Sunday church livestream. Her friends called her family. The family went to her house around 11 a.m. Her phone was on the counter. Her medication, which she needed daily, was untouched. Her personal belongings were all still there. At noon, they called 911. By afternoon, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos was on camera saying what the evidence at the scene was already making clear. Nancy Guthrie did not leave her home on her own. She was taken. Her blood was confirmed at the front door. Crime scene. FBI called in. Search operation launched across hundreds of square miles of Pima County, larger than the state of New Jersey. The FBI's Video Forensic Analysis Unit, the same team that worked the Brian Kohberger case, analyzed her Nest doorbell camera footage frame by frame and built a suspect profile. Here's what they confirmed. The suspect is a male, approximately 5'9" to 5'10", average build. He is wearing a ski mask, black latex gloves, a belly band holster with what appears to be a handgun, and a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack. A backpack sold exclusively at Walmart. And now, crucially, ABC News confirmed through sources. This man was captured on her doorbell camera on 2 separate days. One day he showed up without the backpack, appeared to notice the camera, and left. He came back the second time prepared. With the gun, with the bag, with everything. This is not a burglary. This is not a crime of opportunity. This was planned, thus surveilled and executed. The ransom notes, multiple of them, demanded payment in cryptocurrency. 2 deadlines passed, no payment confirmed, no verified proof of life as of this recording. The FBI's reward is now $100,000. Total rewards across all agencies top $200,000. Over 50,000 tips have poured in. DNA from the crime scene is being processed, and the FBI, to quietly with almost no media attention, has already been in contact with Mexican authorities. The Guthrie family has been cleared, all members, by name, on camera. So who took Nancy Guthrie, and why her? Let's talk about this man, because the footage we have is limited. He's masked, he's gloved, he's deliberate. But forensic analysts and body language experts have been dissecting every frame. And what they've found is revealing.
Which experts, Susan Constantine, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. And there's a lot to get into, a lot that may stand out to you from your unique perspective. What do you see in that video?
Well, in that very first video where you showed him with his hand up near the camera, if you could back up from that before that, there was probably more telling. So one of the things that I looked for is the surrounding environment, where there he is, the person of interest is standing in conjunction to the wall height, to the archway when this person comes walking in and exiting. So why is that important? Right here's a good picture. So you can see literally 3 layers of brick. So if you could measure down 3 layers of brick, and then from that point down to the ground will give you the overall height. Also, when this person is exiting and coming in, you can also use that as a measurement. I don't know how high that arch is, but that's what I look at. When I'm looking at a suspect and we're trying to determine who that is and profile them, I'm looking at all of the outside perimeter areas, whether it's trees or bushes or pylons or garbage cans or whatever it is, and then measuring from there. So right there is a really great picture of what we're looking at. So the other thing,
body language expert Susan Constantine, who analyzed the footage for Fox 10, made a specific observation that's getting overlooked. She said, and I'm quoting her exact analysis, "He has a long torso and shorter legs." That's not a throwaway observation. That's a physiological proportion pattern. In forensic anthropology, torso to leg ratios can be regionally distinct. Studies in skeletal and body proportion analysis have long documented that populations with ancestral origins in Mesoamerica, central Mexico, southern Mexico, Guatemala, often present with a longer trunk relative to leg length compared to North American and Northern European lineages. This is documented in anthropological literature. I am not saying this suspect is from Mexico. What I am saying is that Susan Constantine, a forensic behavior expert with decades of credentialed experience, also identified a physical trait pattern in this man that is worth placing alongside everything else we know. Now add what private investigator Bill Garcia, a former law enforcement professional who specializes in cartel and border crime in Arizona, told Border Report just this week. He looked at the same footage and said the holster the suspect is wearing is a type typically made in Mexico. The weapon fits poorly. It's too big for the gun. And the way the suspect approaches the camera, poking shrubbery in front of a Nest Cam rather than disabling it or simply avoiding it, suggests to Garcia that this is a low-level associate, someone who received an order, someone carrying out a job for someone else, not operating with the sophistication of an autonomous criminal. A contractor, not a kingpin. 5'9" to 5'10". Average build. Long torso, shorter legs, holster possibly of Mexican manufacture worn improperly. No CODIS match in 22 million FBI criminal profiles. And 0 hits when the DNA is searched against the largest federal criminal database in the world. That last point deserves to stop and breathe for a second. Over 22 million DNA profiles in CODIS. This person is not among them, which means one of two things. Either this suspect has never been arrested, never convicted, never entered the U.S. criminal justice system, or this suspect's DNA wasn't in the database because they weren't processed through that system in the first place. The FBI has reached out to Mexican authorities. That is confirmed by ABC News and NBC News sourcing. Investigators are exploring as a legitimate avenue of investigation whether this crime has a connection across the border. It's not speculation from the internet. That is law enforcement telling us, on the record, that they are not ruling Mexico out. Now let's talk about what may actually crack this case open, because this is where it gets genuinely extraordinary. Investigators have confirmed DNA from the crime scene at Nancy Guthrie's property. The sheriff confirmed it's a mixture of DNA, which forensic experts say is common in violent crimes. None of it matched anything in CODIS. So now they've moved to something far more powerful: investigative genetic genealogy. Here's how this works and why it matters enormously for the Mexico angle. Genetic genealogy, the same technique that caught the Golden State Killer Joseph DeAngelo after 40 years, takes an unknown DNA sample and instead of searching criminal databases, searches public genealogy databases. It builds a family tree backward from the DNA. It finds relatives who have voluntarily submitted their own DNA to services like GED Match or other platforms. Then investigators trace forward through that family tree: births, deaths, marriage records, public records, until they triangulate on who the suspect likely is. Here's the critical piece. C.C. Moore, the chief genetic genealogist at Parabon Nanolabs, the gold standard in this field, was interviewed specifically about the Guthrie case. And she said this: if the suspect's parents, grandparents, or even great-grandparents were born in Mexico, the genealogy process will likely take longer. Why? Because the public genealogy databases are heavily weighted toward people who self-submitted their DNA, and those populations skew toward North American and Northern European ancestry. People with roots in Mexico, Central America, or Latin America are statistically underrepresented in those voluntary databases. Let that sink in. If this suspect has Mexican ancestry, the genealogy trail becomes harder to follow, not impossible, but slower. The FBI knows this. That is precisely why, according to law enforcement sources, the Bureau has been reaching out to Mexican authorities. Because if the suspect's family tree roots back across the border, the path to identification runs through Mexico. A volunteer genealogist on the ground in Tucson put it plainly. Depending on where this DNA leads, they may be looking at family trees that don't appear in American databases at all. The DNA has not yielded a name yet, but the investigation is actively pointing south. The FBI is asking, Mexico is listening, and the genealogy clock is ticking. Now, here's where I need your full attention, because this is the part that the mainstream media has touched and then immediately walked away from. And I think that's a mistake. Charles Errol Guthrie, born Christmas Day, 1938, in Harlan County, Kentucky, mining engineer. He moved his family to Australia for work, then to Tucson, Arizona. By the early 1970s, the Guthrie family was settled in Tucson, where they would stay for generations. He was Nancy's husband. He was Savannah's father. He was, by every account from his family, the center of their world, larger than life, charismatic, adored. On June 10, 1988, Charles Guthrie died in Mexico on a mining exploration trip. He was 49 years old. Cause of death? Heart attack. He was flown home and buried at Evergreen Memorial Park in Tucson. Now, let me be very clear. There is nothing in any public record that connects Charles Guthrie to anything criminal. His family describes his death as a devastating, sudden loss. Savannah has spoken about it publicly for decades, with nothing but grief and love. And the official record is clear: heart attack, mining trip, Mexico. But here is where the speculative analysis begins. And I want to be transparent that this is speculation, framed as the kind of question investigators and journalists should be asking, and are likely already asking behind closed doors. Charles Guthrie was a mining engineer operating in Mexico in the 1980s. The 1980s in Mexico were not a quiet decade. The Gulf Cartel was consolidating power. The Guadalajara Cartel under Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, the godfather of the modern Mexican drug trade, was running operations across the entire country, including into mineral-rich regions where legitimate mining operations routinely intersected with criminal enterprises controlling territory, labor, and transport routes. A mining engineer in Mexico in 1988, operating in regions where cartel territorial control was absolute, would have had no ability to avoid that ecosystem. You don't cross cartel territory in 1980s Mexico without awareness. You don't secure labor, materials, or transport without operating within whatever power structure controls that region. That is not an accusation of Charles Guthrie. That is the documented reality of how Mexico operated in that era, confirmed by decades of subsequent reporting, trials, and DEA records. Now here's the question that investigators may or may not be asking, and that I think deserves to be on the table. Did Charles Guthrie, over decades of work in Mexico, intersect with networks or individuals who may have retained long-term knowledge of his family? Of Nancy? Of where she lived? Of who she was? Mining engineers in cartel-adjacent regions in 1980s Mexico were sometimes used, willingly or not, as information sources, conduit points for money movement through legitimate business structures, or simply as relationships cultivated for future leverage. This is documented extensively in the history of the Guadalajara and Sinaloa cartels' operations during that era. Charles died in 1988. He's been gone 38 years, but Nancy stayed. Same house, same neighborhood, same city, 60 miles from the border. And now, you're 38 years later, someone who apparently has no criminal record in the United States, wearing a holster that a Mexico-experienced private investigator says looks like it came from Mexico, with DNA that may trace back through a family tree rooted south of the border, came to Nancy Guthrie's house. Twice. To take her. I am not telling you these things are connected. I am telling you that the dots exist, and that nobody in mainstream media has drawn a line between them. 2 days ago, El Mencho died. Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes, leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, the most powerful active drug lord on earth as of last week. $15 million U.S. bounty on his head. Killed by the Mexican army in the mountains of Jalisco state with U.S. intelligence support. Within hours, 252 roadblocks, 20 states, 70 plus dead. Guadalajara shut down, but U.S. Embassy orders Americans to shelter in place. Flight cancellations out of Puerto Vallarta and Guadalajara. The CJNG retaliated with what security analysts are calling narco-terrorism, burning vehicles across highway arteries, blocking national supply chains, signaling to the Mexican government and the world that the organization doesn't die with its leader. Now here's what's critical for this case. The CJNG operates extensively in Sonora State. Sonora is the Mexican state that shares the border with Tucson, Arizona. Sonora is one of the primary trafficking corridors for fentanyl, methamphetamine, and cocaine flowing north. It is also the state whose Attorney General's office was specifically contacted and confirmed contact with U.S. investigators in the Nancy Guthrie case. The Searching Mothers of Sonora, a non-profit of Mexican mothers whose children were taken by cartel violence, came to Tucson to volunteer in the search for Nancy. They know this terrain. They've lived it. The CJNG and the Sinaloa cartel have been fighting a territorial war in Sonora for control of border trafficking routes. After El Mencho's death, analysts are warning that succession battles inside the CJNG could trigger exactly the kind of chaotic, opportunistic violence that doesn't fit neatly into anyone's profile of how a kidnapping should look. Former DEA agent Derek Maltz told News Nation this week they will be fighting it out to see who rises to power. When cartels fight for succession, low-level operatives are given jobs to prove loyalty, jobs that generate cash, jobs like kidnapping. Now, 3 theories. And I want to lay them out honestly. Theory 1. This is entirely unrelated to cartels or Mexico. The suspect is a domestic actor, a stalker, a predator, someone with a personal or financial fixation on the Guthrie family or on Nancy specifically, who happened to execute this crime with enough sophistication to leave no domestic paper trail. The Bitcoin ransom demand, the planning, the surveillance visits, all consistent with a calculated individual operating alone. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer has publicly argued this position, noting that a cartel-linked kidnapping would have been faster, cleaner, and wouldn't have used shrubbery to cover a camera. Theory 2. This is a cartel-adjacent operation, not necessarily ordered from the top, but carried out by someone connected to cartel networks operating through Arizona's border corridor. The suspect's physical profile, the holster, the DNA genealogy pointing toward potential Mexican ancestry, the Bitcoin ransom, and the FBI's documented outreach to Mexican authorities all point in this direction. Private investigator Bill Garcia, with actual expertise in this area, believes the Catalina foothills, quote, is a high drug and money transporting area, and that this crime bears the hallmarks of a cartel-connected money-making operation, even if the specific perpetrator is a low-level associate, not a cartel boss. Theory 3. And this is the most speculative, the most controversial, and the one I want you to sit with. Is there a long tail to Charles Guthrie's work in Mexico that nobody has pulled yet? Did decades-old relationships, debts, or knowledge, dormant for 38 years, resurface in the form of a man at Nancy's door? Mining operations in cartel-controlled regions of 1980s Mexico created entanglements that took years, sometimes decades, to surface. We've seen it in narco-finance cases. We've seen it in trafficking prosecutions, long memories, patient operations. I cannot prove Theory 3. No one can right now. But I can tell you that the FBI is actively using genealogical DNA to trace this suspect's family tree. And if that tree has roots in Mexico, in Sonora, in Jalisco, in any of the states where the Guthrie mining operations of the 1980s intersected with cartel territory, that is an investigative thread that cannot be ignored. Here's what we know right now, today, on February 24th, 2026. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 24 days. The FBI has reached out to Mexico. The DNA is being run through genealogy. The suspect has a physical profile that at least one forensic expert has flagged as consistent with Mesoamerican ancestry. His holster may have come from across the border. And 3 days ago, the cartel world that operates in the state directly south of Tucson exploded into succession warfare. Her husband died in Mexico 38 years ago. She has lived 60 miles from that border ever since. I don't know who took Nancy Guthrie. Nobody outside of law enforcement does. But the DNA knows. The genealogy will eventually know. And when those results come back, and they will come back, we are going to find out if this case is exactly what it looks like on the surface, or if it reaches back further and darker than anyone in the mainstream media has been willing to say out loud. When that happens, Twisted Crime Ledger will be right here covering it. If you've been following this case, if something about any of this feels familiar, if any of this sparked a connection in your mind that we haven't made yet, drop it in the comments. This audience is sharp. You've spotted things before that investigators confirmed later. Subscribe to Twisted Crime Ledger so you don't miss it when this breaks, because based on what the FBI is chasing right now, it's going to break. Nancy, we haven't forgotten you. We are still looking.